So I think we can start.
Yes, Avantika, we can start.
So Anumita ma'am, we are ready to start. Ma'am, we are ready to start.
We can start now?
Yes.
I'll just... Welcome everyone to this very exciting conversation on climate mitigation agenda in India. I'm Anumita Roy Chaudhary from Center for Science and Environment, and I'm here with my colleagues Rajneesh Sareen, Avantika Goswami, Parth Kumar, and Richa Singh, all experts and well-known in their respective field. So COP28 is less than a month away. But we need this conversation on the climate mitigation in India, not only to build ambition for the agenda for change, but also to understand the connection between local action and global action and the global enablers and accelerators needed for ambitious action in key sectors of mitigation, which are transport, industry, solid waste management, and thermal management in urban habitat. These are the sectors where we expect the maximum carbon lock-in to happen as we grow economically. But this conversation is also important from the perspective of what COP28 will focus primarily on this time, that is the global stocktake, that will evaluate progress towards meeting Paris goals. Already the synthesis report that we have seen talks about the persistent emission gap, how current climate commitments are not in line and therefore, we are missing the pathways. But the message is that ultimately what will matter most is what all countries will do together for the cumulative emission reduction. This is about upscaled local action, but also with global enablers. And that's what we really want to focus in today. What we want to keep in mind is the critical question in the global south like India. How do we make the right development choices, but still be on a low carbon pathway? How, while developing, we can meet the core benefits of sustainability, low carbon pollution, local pollution, decarbonization, job creation, and what you have. How do we decouple emissions from growth and we still be with ambitious emission reduction when we are starting with low emission baseline, but we have to grow rapidly? And how do we manage that? So clearly, this requires very hard, locally driven, appropriate pathways to leverage, one, the local policy and financing ecosystem that we'll talk about, and for locally appropriate action, but at the same time, be able to access global enablers to meet the shortfall in resources to speed up the change. So let's keep in mind that low carbon development pathways are actually already taking shape in India through specific policies, programs, initiatives. But what more is needed? And from that perspective today, I and our team here, we will be discussing 4 critical areas. One, the transportation that has enormous potential for mitigation, industrial system that needs deep emission cuts, especially in hard to abate sectors, carbon trapping, addressing carbon trapping in our buildings and cities due to wrong design and energy material inefficiency, also the demand for cooling, and circularity of waste management to prevent GHG emissions. So all these pathways have huge finance, as we will see as we go forward, have huge financing needs, require new technology, new infrastructure, new design solutions, and that demands upscaled climate finance, risk mitigation instruments, innovative financing, and all that is on the table. So going forward, let's therefore keep in mind that COP28 presidency has already laid out some global decarbonization accelerators for industry, power, some segments of transport, and so forth. And they're also talking about plans to accelerate capital expenditure, technology deployment to be able to be on that net zero pathway. But how do we inform that process better? That's the question. So, the question that we want to begin with today, how do we strengthen the domestic climate action with locally driven, effective pathways and resources, but at the same time, access strategic and effective global enablers and accelerators? That's the key question. So, with that, let me open the discussion and invite Avantika to first lay that what is the lay of the issue today and what is it that we need to keep in mind for framing of the question.
Thank you very much, Anumita ma'am, for that excellent and very sort of comprehensive context setting for today's discussion. So, hello everyone, I'm Avantika Goswami. I'm a program manager in the climate change program at CSE. Very briefly today, I touch upon the real imperative, the crucial need for climate mitigation and the science, what the latest science is telling us, which is then driving this pressure on economies around the world to decarbonize. So, as many of you will be aware, the IPCC, the UN's climate science body, recently completed its 6th assessment cycle, and it has collated and put out the latest and best available climate science. And scientists are in agreement today that current concentrations of greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, are far above the levels deemed safe for human life, ecosystems, and other forms of life. Almost 100% of this has been caused by human-driven activities, and every additional 0.5 degree of warming will lead to hotter extremes of temperature, extreme precipitation, drought, and other extreme weather phenomena. The IPCC also states with high confidence that without rapid, deep, and sustained mitigation and accelerated adaptation actions, loss and damage will continue to increase. Today, we are at a place where GHG emissions are 54% higher as compared to what they were in 1990. This is the figure for 2019. And the IPCC has laid out its pathways for global emission scenarios and said that we need to cut global emissions by 43% by 2030 compared to 2019 levels if we are to meet the Paris Agreement's goals. However, we are not on track to do this. The latest UNFCCC report from this month suggests that we will be only 2% lower by 2030, even if all current climate pledges are implemented. So with that, we come to the question of India, and that's our focus today, which is India's emissions profile as well as the subsequent decarbonization pathways that my colleagues will lay out. Now, if we look at India as a country, the story is quite similar, both when we look at historical emissions as well as present-day emissions. Historically, we were a very low contributor to carbon dioxide emissions. We emitted only 3%, 3.16% of all carbon dioxide since 1870. So when the question of historical responsibility comes up, India is one of the least contributors to this current crisis. But even today, with a rapidly growing population, growing energy demand, we are still only, we contribute only 7% of global carbon dioxide emissions. So today we are still not we're still far behind countries such as China and the United States, despite our massive energy needs and our developmental goals, which we are yet to fulfill. So, bearing that in mind, it's also important to remember that we are one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. Our surface air temperature has increased by 0.7 degrees Celsius between 1901 and 2018. And this is leading to all kinds of negative impacts that we are seeing across our economy, from displacement of vulnerable people to income losses due to extreme heat and other types of impacts. And there are, of course, various projections of further GDP loss with higher levels of global warming. So as a result of these, today, India is ranked 7th amongst the top 10 countries most affected by climate change impacts. Um, Analysis by my colleagues at Down to Earth and CSE suggests that India is experiencing something like almost a disaster a day in terms of extreme weather events. So our latest extreme weather database shows that India experienced extreme weather events on 86% of the days in 2023. And this really drives further the need to develop clear domestic mitigation pathways, which will not only offer multiple co-benefits, but will also prevent the worst impacts of climate change and thereby reduce the need for further adaptation and loss and damage. Now, globally, when we talk about mitigation, the IPCC in its 6th assessment cycle has laid out a menu of options. Mitigation solutions are not new. There's not pending research for most of the mitigation solutions. These solutions and technologies are today mature. They are mature, they are available, and they are mostly affordable. For example, the IPCC's Working Group 3 report has shown that on a per unit cost basis, solar energy has dropped 85%, wind by 55%, and lithium ion batteries by 85%. Of course, these are global figures and there are regional variations, but mitigation solutions are plenty and they are today technically viable. They are becoming increasingly cost effective and are generally supported by the public, all of which aids in further deployment in many regions. However, the story differs region by region, and this is where we come to the question of countries of the global south, where mitigation must be enabled, as Anumita ma'am alluded to, global enablers. The burden of mitigation cannot be borne by emerging and developing economies without support from developed countries. So finance is, of course, a major factor, and there are a number of other challenges which my colleagues will highlight. But speaking of finance alone, India's estimated financing needs to just achieve its climate pledge to the UNFCCC is about 170 billion US dollars per year. And recent finance flows, data on finance flows shows that only 1/5 of these needs are currently being met. There are other challenges which affect global south countries from the financing point of view. Most climate finance today is offered in the form of loans and not grants, further increasing indebtedness of developing countries. The regions where most of the low and middle income countries are located today receive less than 25% of climate finance. If you look at the graph on the right, most of the growth in clean energy investment has occurred in China, the European Union, and the United States. So there isn't a equitable regional distribution of investment in clean technologies to enable the kind of mitigation that's needed. So despite all of these challenges, India is still proactive on climate action. It has submitted a 3-part pledge to the UNFCCC under the Paris Agreement, and it has in fact ratcheted upwards, meaning it has made this pledge more ambitious as of last year. So it increased its emissions intensity target to being 45% reduction by 2030 from 2005 levels, and it has increased its non-fossil power capacity target to 50%. And analysis shows that for at least 2 out of 3 of its NDC targets, India is on track to meet them. So we are definitely not a laggard on climate action. We do bring up very important arguments such as CBDR and equity at climate forums. And we definitely do keep up the pressure on developed economies. A latest statement by India has suggested that developed countries should become carbon negative by 2050. So India is definitely a voice for the rest of the global south in reminding developed countries about the climate justice issue. If we look at India sectorally today, the power sector, the energy sector with a particular focus on the power sector is a major contributor to India's greenhouse gas emissions, given that about 73% of our power is generated from coal today. But this is also a sector for which India has an NDC and is on track to achieve and perhaps overachieve that target. There are other major sectors such as road transport, enteric fermentation from livestock within the agriculture sector, and the industrial sector, which are other major contributors. But the fact is that opportunities to decarbonize do exist across all of these sectors, and this is the conversation that really needs to be had. With the right mix of incentives, policy certainty, and international support or global enablers, we definitely can achieve decarbonization of many of these sectors and ascend on a low carbon growth path. So that's what my colleagues will be touching upon today, highlighting both opportunities as well as challenges in each of the sectors of their expertise. So with that, I'll hand the mic back to Anumita ma'am to introduce the rest of the speakers for today.
Thank you so much, Avantika. That was a great context setting. And the key message that comes out from what you said, that how can developing countries like India be on a growth path that is equitable, that is affordable, and that we can, and the transition that we need to make is transformative at the same time. And this is something that we really need to understand in specific sectors. And that's what we will be focusing on and discussing, that how sector by sector we need to understand the unique imperatives, the unique challenges, and prepare for the solutions to take shape and take scale of mitigation. So let's start with the transport sector. And let me quickly, therefore, share my screen and the presentation. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Right. So I begin with the transport sector. And clearly, everything that we have read and seen so far, it's very clear that transport sector is also today turning out to be what we call hard to abate sector. IPCC in its report of 2022 was very clear that while transport sector, they're 15% of the global emissions, but it's also the fastest growing source of emissions. So we have not yet bent the curve of emissions. And it is a very big part of the urban emissions which are rising very rapidly. And all the scenarios and all the studies show that it is a continuous increase, that if we are not strong enough with our strategies. And there is going to be a clear pattern now, a trend, and the difference between the developed and the developing countries. So you have the OECD countries where we are beginning to see that energy for passenger travel is going to now decline until 2030, purely because that their economy, there's a slower economic and population growth, and also the greater impact of the energy efficiency improvement in vehicles. But what will increase in their part of the world is from the other sectors, that is from the energy for the air travel, from shipping, and that's going to increase now in the OECD. But in the non-OECD, where the new growth is going to take place, all the new projections are showing that the annual increase in the energy consumption due to travel and the transportation is going to be quite dramatically high, whether that's India, Africa, and other parts of the world. And it's also very interesting that when we talk about transport sector emissions, it is just not what we typically understand in India, that we always think of the roadways. But it's not just the road transport, but it is also the shipping, your airways, and all of that together. And that's something very interesting, again, that globally what we are finding and that's also because of the action in the developed world, where they have been able to reduce their emissions from road transport more, the relative contribution of the aviation and marine are increasing. So even though globally road transport continued to dominate, which about at 77%, but in India, it is 90%. So we still have to go a long way to deal with our road transport. And that's going to be a challenge because when we look specifically in India and in all the IEA projections that clearly showing that how the road transport is now dominates the energy consumption, but that's also rising very rapidly going till about 2040. And it's the cars and the freight. Those are going to be the key drivers of energy consumption in the transport sector. But at the same time, it is also how we commute in our cities are going to be a huge contributing factor. And now we know that globally that there's a growing global demand for passenger transport. And if you look at the difference between the OECD and the non-OECD again, that the growth is certainly going to be more in the non-OECD countries where the demand for travel is just going to increase manyfold. In India, the passenger kilometer to increase would be 3 times more by 2050. And what is interesting that this is the cusp of change and the crossroad where we are, that we have a huge opportunity to do things differently. That even though we are talking about this massive growth, but even today, we are talking about only 20% of the passenger kilometer by cars. Whereas, but at the same time, the buses are also 20%. Now, this means that the overall dependence on personal vehicles can increase manyfold if we do not act on time right now, because ownership has already doubled during the last decade. So the demand for different mode of transport will increase over time, but what we are worried about that if the share of the private transport takes over the public transport, and that might happen if we do not act on time. Now the signs are bad right now because everywhere, all the cities we are looking at in India, we are finding that how over a period of time since 2013, 18 cities have lost combined ridership, bus ridership over more than 40 lakhs. So, which means even when the travel demand is growing, but the public transport ridership is coming down. So that's going to be a very important reversal that we need to see, that how do you again reform. Now that is the inflection point that we're talking about, that how do we therefore take action and we are able to reverse this trend and bend the curve and accelerate the agenda for transformative changes. So what are those? So therefore in CSC, when we looked at the specific strategies that are needed to scale up action. So one clearly is the technology roadmap, that the vehicles need to be a lot more fuel efficient. But the worrying part is that currently for the cars, we have the fuel efficiency norms, and these are also so weak that they are not going to make much of a difference. So in fact, the latest standard which came into force in 2023, the fleet was already 5%, 7% close to meeting that standard when the standards were about to be implemented. So which means they don't have to do much improvement to be able to meet the standard. So the standard cannot be technology forcing. So clearly we need tighter targets. We want to design our fuel economy regulations in such a way that they are not only for cars, but also for two-wheelers, for buses, for trucks. And at the same time, they're so effective that they should require a sizable shift to electric vehicles to be able to meet the fleet-wide targets for carbon reduction. So that's where we really need to see the big change happening. The other big agenda is the whole zero emission transition. And globally, as you know, that today the many cities have made commitments to move out of internal combustion engine completely. And already we are seeing in different vehicle segments how the global fleet is increasing. Now, even in India today, we are just about close to 5% of the new fleet that are electric, but these are all small format vehicles, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, e-rickshaws. But this is where we have to see the power of regulation and standard setting and target setting, that we have achieved electrification so far with incentive programs, but that's not enough. We clearly need zero emission mandate. We need effective fuel economy regulations. We need deployment strategy, but also keep in mind, looking at it globally, that if we have to therefore localize huge and need a very ambitious target for electrification, then we also need to scale up our local manufacturing. But that also means we need equitable access to battery material globally and and access to technology, and the cost of transition will also have to be enabled. So those are the issues that we have to look at while we are also mobilizing our own resources to scale up this program. But what is interesting is that where we have a huge opportunity to prevent carbon lock-in, that is mobility, how we travel. But that's where we are slipping very badly. In fact, our advantages in our current baseline, where majority in our cities are still walking, cycling, using public transport. And yet, our investment and reform of those systems is minimal. So what we really require is massive scaling up of low pollution carbon transport infrastructure, walking, cycling, public transport infrastructure. We have to reduce travel demand. We have to reduce distances through compact urban planning. We need to shift to much more efficient modes. And more important, we have to address now the long-range transport, where instead we have to now reduce our dependence on roadways and improve the share of railways, for instance. Now, that's a big-ticket agenda, and we really have to find a way of making have a lot of enablers and accelerators there. So now to conclude, looking at it again from the global perspective, that when the studies were carried out to review all the second-generation NDCs with their improved targets for what was found that in any case, NDCs are not strong enough to cover all that is needed to address the whole range of emissions that needs to be cut. But even within that, what they're committed to do, they are only about touching 8% of the transport emissions. So clearly, even globally, we are not even prepared to deal with this big ticket item, which really requires massive reduction. And also, all the emission gap reports that come from UNEP, they also show that if you look at the investments happening post-infrastructure, post-pandemic, that the traditional transport spending is 3 times more than spending on sustainable transport. So clearly, we have not yet been able to repurpose spending globally to be able to scale up sustainable options. Now, domestic finance, public finance flows have started in India, where we have started to invest at the huge amount of money that has been earmarked for the transport infrastructure, public transport, and so forth. But even that is falling short of what is really needed for the transformative changes. And that's where we are running into problems. So when we look at it from the global perspective and the global financing, there's a huge risk of transportation being underfunded. And there are huge challenges, what we know from the past experiences, in accessing climate finance for transport, because it is very difficult to establish additionality in transport because it's a combination of strategies that are required for emission saving. And those savings are also longer term, not short term, like you do with technology interventions in other sectors. And this also needs appropriate metrics for assessing what you require in terms of transport finance. And it's very difficult to do measurements, reporting, and verification for GHG reduction in the transport. So we really have to now think through those instruments and see what needs to be done to enable much better finance flow into the transportation sector. So finally, what we really want to say, that is interesting that when we look at it from the COP process, the technology agenda has started to get some traction, like we saw in the last couple of COPs. So the zero emission electrification target, where countries have come to sign on pledge for 100% zero emission by 2030, 2040, like including India, that is signed on to that pledge. But again, that now needs massive in the key enablers and global action on range of issues to make that happen. But transportation and mobility solutions, they continue to remain weak and lack scale and lack focus. Even the COP27 presidency in Egypt had rightly focused and said that we need high-level commitments for sustainable mobility. But what was ironical, that even though it happened and there was a transport day to do that, and even though Egypt launched its low-carbon transport for urban sustainability, but no government has joined this initiative so far, only non-state stakeholders. Now, that's where we are ending today. So with our huge leapfrog agenda domestically, but then there is so much of a blur and confusion globally around this agenda. So what do we expect in COP28? And that's the question I leave you with. So thank you very much. And so now we move on to the next presentation. And I invite my colleague Rajneesh Sareen to tell us about that, how the urban habitat and buildings are locking in enormous carbon and emissions, and what do we need to do?
Thank you, Anumita. Good evening to all. And I think the urban is somewhere the area where most of the issues or concerns are now joining hand together. It's like the waste management, circular economy, we are talking about heat or whatever elements we are talking, it's all arranging here. So when I look at cities, give me maybe in summers I get heat from there, and in winter that same heat turns into a pollution. That's the time where we are right now in Delhi, where we are reaching to the severe conditions. So what we are trying to talk in this is like the cities, what we are exactly doing at this stage. What is the IPCC ER6 is talking about? That 350 million people are coming onto the risk of water scarcity. We do see 30% of the global population is going to outside the ambit of thermal comfort. So that means there is an exposure to heat which we are looking at. Cities which are responsible for 75% of the GHG. And mind you, city is an area where not only the city administration who are pumping money, it's individual, like all of us are pumping huge amount of money by building our houses, we're making our infrastructure which are around ourselves, which are either contributor or could be made as an enabler also in the future. So that's where the area, like for example, in space cooling also, if the trends goes the way they are, heat is going to bounce more. And as well as there is more population, as well as pressure on the cities. So eventually what we are looking at, space cooling is India and China, current emissions together on electricity will be coming only specifically, will be able to cater only the space cooling requirement. So huge amount of emissions and targets are expected, which is going to be a scenario which we need to change at this moment. Now, what is the, you can say the scope of amendments or changes or mitigation which is expected largely in the small and medium size, because the bigger cities are already right now struggling with all whatever the kind of worst combinations which we have with us. So what are the focus largely here? What we are looking at is like we have to work something which is on urban heat islands. We have to work on land use, maybe urban morphologies, socioeconomic factors. We have to look at cities, zonings, urban forms and all. Similarly, reports, there are multiple reports. The UNEP is telling you, IPCC is telling you, IEA is telling you, they are talking about largely one agenda that you have to work on cooling, you need to work on envelopes, you need to work on buildings, you need to work on materials, you have to work on how these compositions make and join hand together within the cities. So why it is very important? The important why, currently, for example, if we say that, so we are expanding our floor plates. For example, the construction is expanding by 15%, but our nomenclature by which we become more efficient is not improving accordingly. Now, what is happening in this scenario? So 110 countries so far are lacking with their mandatory requirement of energy goods. So situation is expected to go towards what we do not want as a scenario too. But unfortunately and fortunately, whatever the results are coming, they are not in line of the content which we are doing. For example, space cooling, every year is adding around 3% of more increased energy demand under it. So this is a scenario which we need to cater to. So what is the global commitment we are talking about? Net zero is talking about energy consumptions. That means that we have to drop 25% by within 2030. Now this scenario is very close. That means almost 9% every year we need to bring it down below the average. Now, how this is possible? I think the mandate is also very clear that we have to build better. We have to build with a kind of a passive strategy and solutions for the cooling under it. Then we need to change the behavior so that people understand where the temperatures. We can debate on temperatures, what ranges are there, but this is largely what the internationally agenda is looking at, improving the efficiency, primarily when you look at air conditioner equipments and things like that. Now, what is the response of India towards? India is targeting to become net zero somewhere in 2070. There are various initiatives which have been done. Today, in fact, there is a launch of Cities 2.0, where India is actually doubling up their investment which they are giving under cities, which was done in Cities 1.0. So 2.0 is looking at a further more. What is Cities 2.0 is going to do? It's going to culminate all these things together. For example, the National Mission 2.01, long-term low carbon development strategy we build up, India Cooling Action Plan, ECBC, as well as the BE, whatever energy efficiency rating for equipments. All these are going to be clubbed together, leveraged through, so that cities actually bring up something very common agenda for us, so that we head towards something which is called net zero emissions. Now, what are these new approaches which are being looked at? City needs to map their heat and their flood vulnerabilities. And this needs to be integrated very well with the master plans existing as well as what is coming in future. Largely, as I said, the mid and the long, whatever the cities which are there, maybe the one which is upcoming more needs to be focused at. Then when it comes to building and neighborhood scale, you need to work more with the materials, envelopes, design, orientation, ventilation strategies, green and blue infrastructure, so that we bring up something which is internal cooling systems within our city, which is passive potential we have. Then another agenda which comes from ICAP, which is the India Cooling Action Plan, is talking about the not-in-kind cooling technology. Now, these are the potential which has been there with the weather which is around us. So we need to bring those relationships very strongly. We look forward to what COP28 is going to discuss in this, because I think the December 6th is the day when we are going to talk about how built environment is going to be a catalyst for this. What are the breakthroughs which has already happened? There is a ministerial meeting which is expected on urbanization and climate change. We are looking at a new terminology, maybe a new focus which is coming on nature positive cities, as well as we are looking at roundtable on the built environment. So this is what is there coming to you in the next few days when the COP starts. So what you should focus on is city scale. Look at this: Jaipur, Delhi, Pune, Kolkata. What is happening is the land surface temperatures in any case average is going up. So 2 degrees Celsius to 5.5. We are not talking about that your ambient or whatever, you are facing this right now in your cities. And this is, we are talking about mean. Now imagine where the peak would happen. Now cities, not only that the temperatures are going up, the heat centers are increasing. 42% of Jaipur is under heat, 35% of Delhi is under heat, Pune 82% is under heat, and Kolkata, maybe because of a lot of water bodies they have, 12% of that area is under the heat at this moment. But when you club this together with the vulnerability of population, you will actually see that now we have data where India can penetrate into the wards level also and see that where these scenarios and what needs to be changed. So we can even now project how much is an investment which is required. Similarly for flood, you need to bring up sensitive land, sensitive population, and as well as infrastructure together to bring up again an analysis which could be done at the city level to give up the analysis which is required. So, and when we go on to the neighborhood and building scale, there is a huge potential which is there under materials, which we need to explore more on. There is a huge potential which is under design, because what we are building right now is not climate appropriate, may not be helping us to the direction where we need. Even the wind and other things all are not, because what we have done is we have done so much of analytics so far, and what comes up to us is the scenario needs to change now. So this relationships needs to work at. Then there's another intervention area where we, CSC, would like everybody to focus on, or at least the agenda should be driving us towards that, is the space cooling scenario. Because this heat, which is going to rise, it is going to create a demand for cooling. And cooling, what will happen is the displacement of heat again. Now that means this is a vicious cycle which is going to be there in front of us. We'll have more heat bouncing into our environment and more cooling requirements. So 11-time air conditioning requirements, penetration rates of air conditioners are going up. So what we do not need to jump straight to air conditioners. What we need is we need to explore all these possibilities of from microclimate to form to materials to even the apt technology. And then finally, we bring the person to the comfort zone. With these things, what I call for the action agenda is that we need to look for the new approach for urban planning. We need to look at master plan from a very different perspective. We are making form-based codes, make a form-based code which internalize the environment feature for you. Like bring a form-based code for water bodies. Why only for infrastructure development? Bring up something which is a green-blue infrastructure needs to be focused more on. Then we need to look at retrofits. We need to look at affordable housing, specifically where people are that marginalized communities are there. We need to bring up a very good design, features, materials for them. Then institutionalize the climate change action, reduce the cooling in the buildings by doing a climate appropriate design. Bring that tie into your bylaws, material interventions. You may be thinking that I'm just giving you the direction for this. The reason why I'm giving you direction, because as I said, this is the area where there in any case is a public-private partnership. I am building my house. I need a guidance from you that what needs to be a direction which I should be taking on. So with these, I sum it up and hand it over to Anvita.
Thank you so much, Rajneesh. I mean, that was really very good and comprehensive. And well, you made the point very sharp and clear that, the built environment has to be part of the solution, and it works for both adaptation and mitigation. And therefore, through thermal comfort strategies and the design rich and technology combination can give us a solution, but then that really requires handles for scaling up. So from built environment now, we move on to the challenge in the industry sector. And Parth Kumar, please take us through this, but this is a very complicated and a difficult sector to deal with.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'll quickly share my presentation. Is my presentation visible? Okay. So, hello everyone. I'll be talking about the challenge of industries and particularly the hard to abate sectors and how India is dealing with it and what kind of challenges it is facing. So talking about the role of industry in terms of emissions globally, the sixth assessment report of IPCC states that almost 24% of 14 gigatons of CO2 equivalent is a share of the industry. And if you look at the emissions from electricity and heat production attributed to sectors that use the final energy, 90% indirect emissions can be allotted to industry and building. With this final energy assumption, I think this share of 24% has been allocated to 34% globally. So industry, in a sense, is contributing 34% of the emissions globally. Now let's look at India. India submits the biennial update reports to UNFCCC and has submitted almost 5 reports from 94 to 2016. The energy consumption has grown from 1994, the share was 60.5%, has grown to 75% in the last report, which was submitted for 2016. The industrial process and product use share has grown from 8.3% to 7.9%. If you look at the share of industries in the energy share, I think 18.6% of the energy share belongs to manufacturing industries. And if you look at the overall energy share from industries, energy usage is 14%. So if you add up 14% with 7.9%, the overall industrial emission share in India for 2016 has been 22%. So this clearly states that industries are a major contributor to GHG emissions and need very defined particular strategies to deal with them. These are the top 15 sectors which have been contributing to the emissions of India, GHG emissions, and these top 15 sectors are responsible for 85% of the total GHG emissions. 7 out of these top 15 sectors are industrial sectors. If you look at which are the top ones, of course, non-specific industries is one category, which probably includes MSMEs and others. Second is the iron and steel sector and the cement sector. So these are the 3 major categories of industries which have been contributing to GHG emissions from the country. Now, this is about how in India, the industrial production is growing and is planned to grow even in the coming years. If you look at the steel production, cement production, aluminum production, we are almost doubling our production by 2030. You can see steel is going from 125 to 255 million tons per annum. Cement is going from 356 to almost 660, and aluminum also plans to grow their production capacity from 4 to 10 million tons per annum. Now, why are there hard to abate sectors? This needs to be understood because most of these hard to abate sectors are dependent on coal or coal-based power and often use carbon-intensive raw materials. They require high temperatures for their processes, and also coal is cheap and abundantly available and easy to transport. So it's an easy option for all these industries. Let me also tell you that the majority of demand of this production is domestic right now. So this is for sure that these sectors need to grow with the growth of the country, and it is very much required for the growth of the country with the infrastructural growth that is happening around. These are the 2 reports CSC did on laying out the decarbonization pathways for steel and cement sector. The steel report came out last year and the cement sector report recently was published by CSC. I will just tell you the 3 major recommended pathways that CSC proposed for both the sectors. In terms of iron and steel, switching to alternate cleaner fuels was one of the major pathways. increasing scrap-based production in India was another, and how CCUS could play, or carbon capture, utilization and storage, could play a major role. So these were the three key levers for this. For more details, of course, you can access the report on our website. In terms of cement, we clearly, in the cement sector is doing quite well in terms of energy efficiency. But what could we do for 2030 was surely to increase the share of the blended cement production in the country, to increase the share of permissible fly ash in the cement, and of course increase the thermal substitution rate, which is basically reducing coal and using alternative fuels to reduce emissions. Or both the reports show that by adopting these pathways, we can really limit the emissions to very close to the numbers that we are emitting currently. I would also like to talk about some common strategies with terms of industry. What is there on the plate, and what can be done? So I think these kind of strategies are not only applicable to steel and cement, but all the other hard to abate sectors as well. Energy efficiency is one low-hanging fruit that all these sectors have a scope for. I would mention about increasing material circularity, because a lot of industrial waste, or is it the municipal solid waste, all of this can really be used as raw materials or fuels in different industries. And this increase is really, really required. For example, scrap, RDF, use of fly ash in cement, use of slag in cement, red mud. For third strategy, which I want to put out, is about carbon avoidance. And how can we do that? By using cleaner fuels and alternate raw materials, which are less carbon intensive. The examples which I mentioned is, of course, biochar is another, biomass is another fuel which people are looking at, green hydrogen, natural gas, calcined clay in terms of cement. Carbon circularity is another strategy people are looking forward to, in which talks about the capture of carbon, its utilization, which can be a long-term, and storage options which can be there. Also, the important part of the strategy is defining what is green. A lot of industrial products have been called that they are green, but we really need to come on a single page that what defines green and how we can raise the demand of green products, especially domestically, because the consumption demand in India or in emerging economies is very high. So I think that is another major thing which we really need to do. A macro and micro level policy support is important. Recently, we saw that EU had come up with a Green Deal policy for industries, and also micro level policies. I mean, particular missions for decarbonization technologies and pathways. For example, there's a green hydrogen mission. Similarly, we are also looking forward if there can be something for CCUS and many other technologies like that. Another important strategy would be building international cooperation, especially in the field of technology, finance, and trade. These are very critical 3 points where we need to build international cooperation, because in terms of technology, we have been importing a lot of technology. Finance, of course, is required to take this leap. And trade is important because a lot of raw materials, a lot of critical materials, finished products are interdependent. We are interdependent as countries on each other. The last strategy, of course, common strategy I would mention is channelizing financing avenues. We really need to see that how government support or domestic channels can be channelized. A lot of decarbonization which is happening in Europe or US is being government funded and supported. And what is the possibility of that happening in India really needs to be looked at. Concessional financing is another thing which we really need to look at, and how we can ease the channelization of concessional financing and all the conditionalities attached to it. And grants, if there are at all, I mean, needs to be allocated in the right areas, and how we could bring in finance from MDBs to, de-risk and bring in more finance and the perceived risks which are there regarding financing of these technologies and pathways. So that was the common strategies, but there are certain challenges that the Indian industries face, and there are some possible interventions that we can make. First biggest challenge are the high costs of cleaner fuels, natural gas, green hydrogen, biochar. We have been working with industries closely, and they are very, very expensive currently when you compare it to coal. If you talk about raw materials, I mean, the iron and steel sector uses coke or scrap. Both are very, very expensive, and also availability is an issue. And also decarbonization technologies like CCUS, etc., are very expensive right now, and there's very less support for it. So the question is, where will the money come from? Some possible interventions for this, for dealing with high cost, of course, as I said, state support and domestic finance is something we really need to look at. Facilitating initial fund mobilization, like in the case of RE at one point we had done. I think we need to do it now for industrial decarbonization, so that once the initial fund flows and the de-risking happens, a lot of other fund can also flow. Domestic manufacturing and building a competitive market can also bring down rates of these technologies. Another big thing which we are struggling with, we have a huge demand, but demand creation for green products will be a challenge. So how can we create demand for green products? Some of the avenues, possible interventions could be how low product demand, we can look into international markets also for it, and also which are the public bulk consumers of these products in the country, and how can they be mandated to use these green products. The third big challenge is about the issue of fuel and raw material availability and our dependence on imports. So if you look at natural gas, which is of course cleaner than coal, but more 50% of it is being imported. It has a very high price in the country, and which has really changed the path these hard to abate sectors have taken in the last decade. Whether it's coke, 85% of coke is being imported in India currently. All the decarbonization technologies, a majority of them, we really have to depend on a lot of other countries for it to come, which ultimately also increases the cost of the green products. What we can do for that, I think we really need to have a platform to promote circularity amongst industries right now, which is really lacking, which could really fill up for a lot of things which we are importing. Moving towards cleaner and domestically available fuels, biofuels and biomass is a big avenue which industries can look at and are looking at currently. Another thing I would say is the challenge is of lack of R&D in the industrial sector domestically. That is why probably we are dependent on a lot of imports. There are a lot of very domestic challenges that industries are facing in terms of technology, which are very, local, and you might not get a replica of it in some other country. And that is why we really need to work on those technologies and challenges. So that is one thing. There is a PLI scheme already running. We really need to strengthen it, and we really need to flow money in R&D, especially to bring financial and infrastructure support. And another challenge which I see is of the global carbon taxes coming in. And of course, the push for domestic green manufacturing, which has come in internationally. By global carbon taxes, I'm of course referring to CBAM or IRA coming in the US, which is promoting green manufacturing within the country, or the European Green Deal policy is also promoting domestic manufacturing of green products. So what could be our strategy, to deal with these kind of things? I think we should really look forward to more South-South collaborations. We can do, of course, domestic demand for green products has to be increased because we are the largest consumers in the future. And a lot of strategic bilateral deals need to happen to make our way through these kind of issues which we are facing. So at COP28, in terms of industry, what can we expect? I mean, there are some decisions which we are looking forward to, which will really affect what course the industrial sector in India will take. So there is a deadline, a discussion around deadlines proposed for fossil fuel phase out. If something of that sort comes up, I think it will really change the course of the industrial sector. There's a target to double energy efficiency. There is still scope for energy efficiency in all these sectors, and it will really accelerate if we come up with such a target. There's a talk of tripling of RE capacity. Electrification is a process which really needs to be pushed in industries, but is not being able to done because of the cost of the technology, the cost of electricity, and also the nature of the power, which is still coal-based. So increasing RE can definitely push electrification for industries. There are many voluntary initiatives happening, a lot of oil gas companies taking initiatives, and also there's the First Movers Coalition or the Industrial Deep Decarbonization Initiative happening. There's a launch of Climate Club happening, which has a focus on industrial decarbonization this time. The launch will be happening probably in the first week of December. We expect that these kind of clubs will be inclusive in nature and really considerate towards global South countries and their pathways for industrial decarbonization. Discussions on finance and markets are very crucial, as I said, crucial to discuss how international finance and markets can play a major role in the decarbonization journey. And lastly, I would want to say that trade, critical minerals and materials is something that we usually don't discuss at COP so much. But this is something very, very important and needs to be discussed at COP, because this will really, really affect what pathways we will chart. So thank you so much, ma'am, and everybody. This was the presentation from industry. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Parth. That was fascinating, and particularly this whole exercise to understand sector by sector what are the unique imperatives and what we need to do. And keeping in mind, as we are learning from the global experience, that the green technology and greening of industry is also becoming the basis of new industrialization, especially in global South. And that's a new opportunity emerging, and so much for us, therefore, to leverage that and to take that forward. And the point that you made around that the circularity around industrial resource and resource efficiency, I think we do not hear so much about this in the global conversation on industry, but that is our own unique trajectory that we really have to build on. So great. And that actually links me with what Richa is going to talk about, the circularity. And Richa, you are taking us to this whole new dimension of the climate change challenge, which is about the short-lived climate forces, methane, right? Which is so different from CO2, the CO2 that lives in our atmosphere so long, but methane, which is a short-lived, but then there is a much bigger opportunity there because it's a highly heat trapping. And if you can get rid of it, you really get a lot of benefits there. But then that is also linked to a very unique problem in the global South, the waste management. So that's what we would really like to hear from you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Please allow me to share my screen. I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah. So hello, everyone. And today I'm going to talk about methane mitigation strategies in solid waste management sector in India. But before I dive deep in this topic and talk about the strategies and approaches to reduce methane in waste management sector, I would like to talk about what exactly is happening and how methane is produced in municipal solid waste management sector and what is the issue. So globally, if we look at the global scenario, we all are aware landfills or the land disposal of solid waste management of the municipal solid waste is actually responsible for generating huge quantum of methane across the country. In fact, landfills are globally considered as the third largest emitter of methane. If we look at the numbers, as reported by the World Bank, around 1.6 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalents were generated during 2016, and this number is expected to reach 2.6 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalents in 2050, which is so alarming. And if you look at the Indian scenario, here also methane is generated from the landfills and unscientifically constructed dump sites. And if you look at the current generation rate, we are generating nearly 55 million tons of waste. Urban India is generating 55 million of waste, which is actually 50% of it is actually ending up into the sanitary landfills or unscientifically constructed dump sites. So, and 50% of the waste cumulative quantity remains either landfill or it is uncollected, unidentified, or unattended. So this is again very, very it's a huge problem. And the other issue in Indian scenario is the way our landfill works. So if you can see in this slide what actually happens in a scientific or a sanitary landfill. If a landfill is scientifically constructed and operated, then it acts as a containment system, which means that it isolates the waste from the surrounding environment and minimizes the emissions, be it water, be it air, or any sort of contamination. So there is provisions to have barrier layers in the form of high density polyethylene layers or geocomposite layers. there is mechanism to collect and treat the leachate which is generated in the process of decomposition of organic waste which is dumped in a landfill site. And also, most importantly, there is mechanism to trap the landfill gas, which primarily consists of methane. So if we talk about landfill gas, around 45 to 60% of the landfill gas is actually methane. So on the contrary, if we look at the dump sites or the landfills that we have in our country, and not only in India, but many of the developing economies, we are dealing with this issue of unscientific landfills, or we typically call it dump site, where there is no barrier layer. There is no mechanism to collect and treat the leachate which is produced in the process of decomposition, and most importantly, there is no mechanism to trap the landfill gas which consists of methane, which gets continuously getting escaped into the environment. So and besides, there is n number of hazardous compounds which are released in that process, including the very obnoxious and hazardous gases like volatile organic compounds like H2S, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and non-methane organic compounds, which will have not only impact on the climate, but also most importantly, it will cause it can directly or indirectly impact the people who are living in the close vicinity of a landfill area or a dump site. So if we look at the Indian scenario, 1 ton of organic waste has a potential to generate 54 kilograms of methane. That translates to around 1,500 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents, or 1.5 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. Now you imagine if 50% of the total waste, which is around or 50 to 60%, which is around between 25 million to 30 million tons, is getting disposed into landfills or remains unattended, what is the potential of methane getting generated from these landfills and escaped into the environment. Another huge impact of methane which is generated in open dump site is the outbreak of fires. And this also is something that we have been witnessing a lot in India and many of the developing economies, where because of the accumulation of methane, and most of the dump sites that we are seeing in our country are still operational in nature. As a result, a lot of fresh waste is getting disposed of every day. Although we have under the Swachh Bharat mission, we are also focusing on dump site remediation, which I will talk in the later slide. But at the same time, still a lot of fresh waste is getting dumped in, ending up into these landfill sites or the dump sites. As a result, there is continuous emission of methane which is happening, and during summers it gets increased, and any ignitable source, tiny source of ignitable material has a potential to cause huge fire outbreak at the dump sites or the Indian landfills. If we compare the methane concentration in ambient air versus what is the typical concentration of methane in a landfill area or a dump site, open dump site, there is a huge difference. There is a drastic difference. In ambient environment, methane is present in traces, which is equivalent to 0.00017% by volume. Whereas if you calculate or estimate the methane concentration in an open dump site area, it can range between 3% to 15%. Now, methane is a flammable gas, and as a result, during summers, it is catching fire because of the ignitable sources. So again, due to fire outbreaks, there will be release of carbon monoxide, there will be release of carbon dioxide, oxides of nitrogen, sulfur, and all sort of emissions. Now coming to the mitigation strategies, which can be, help us to reduce methane in the waste sector. The first and foremost, in fact, this is also as per our policy mandate, Solid Waste Management Rules 2016, where it is stated that reduction of the waste at the source or reuse of the waste should be the first priority, should be the most preferred option in the waste management hierarchy. And here also, this is something which has been given utmost importance. Then once the waste is generated, what can be done? First is scientific treatment of fresh municipal solid waste or fresh organic waste, which is generated on the day-to-day basis. So if the waste is source segregated, it becomes easy for the city authorities to collect it from the doorsteps. There has to be proper collection system. There has to be 100% collection coverage, and waste needs to be segregated at the source, because the success of any technological intervention depends on the quality of the feedstock or the quality of the waste. If the waste is properly segregated, it becomes easy to treat it. Once it is in mixed form, it becomes practically impossible to segregate it further and then use the organic waste for things like biomethanation or composting and channelizing the dry waste to the recycling facilities. The other thing is the waste that is already there in our dump sites. How do we remediate? Remediation of legacy waste dump site is one of the mitigation strategy. In fact, this is one of the major mandates under the Swachh Bharat Mission 2.0 phase 2 of Government of India, where the focus is on creating garbage-free cities by doing two things. First, scientific treatment of fresh municipal solid waste, which we already discussed about. And second, getting rid of the existing dump sites that we have, so that the long-term vision is to make this country free from this culture of mixed waste dumping, so that if we don't have dump site, we will not be sending our waste to these landfill sites or the dump sites. And by adopting decentralized technologies, by adopting source segregation, we'll be able to channelize the waste fractions to different recycling facilities and will be able to generate revenue out of it. So this is a pictorial representation of how the mitigation strategy works. If you can see the pre-landfill or pre-land disposal phase, where the best thing one can do at an individual level is to reduce the food waste at the source, because organic waste, when it comes to methane, organic waste is a major culprit. We should not be disposing of the organic waste into our landfills, because once it is in the landfill will start acting as an ecosystem itself. There will be interaction between abiotic and biotic factors. There will be sequence of complex biochemical reactions, and a lot of methane will be produced. However, if it is channelized to a biomethanation facility, or if it is channelized to a bio-CNG facility, the same methane which is generated in the controlled condition can be used for various gainful applications. Landfill sites or dump sites, if the waste is already lying in the existing dump sites, again, the way there are three ways we can actually get rid of it. I'll be talking about it in the later slide. If we talk about dump site remediation, the current status, as per Central Pollution Control Board annual reports, there are 3,159 dump sites that needs to be cleared and that needs to be remediated, and these dump sites are reportedly covering an area of 15,000 hectares. So if you want to visualize this much area, this is equivalent to around 14,700 football grounds. So by remediating these sites, we are not only it's not only a long-term solution in terms of climate change, but also it is generating a lot of revenue in terms of the land that we are clearing because of the remediation of existing dump sites. As per Mahua, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, there is around 231 million tons of legacy waste that needs to be remediated, and out of which 33% has been remediated already as on today, 16th November 2023. However, there are certain challenges and also gaps in the data and preliminary planning. There is incorrect estimation of legacy waste, and that is why we don't know how much is the quantum of waste which is still lying in our dump sites. These numbers are, we do not have any historic data on how much waste has been generated in the country, out of which how was the composition, how much it was actually organic or biodegradable in nature. Then the other thing is gainful utilization and scientific disposal of recovered material, whatever waste fractions we are being able to generate as a result of biomining operation or dump site remediation process. If it is not gainfully utilized, or if it is not disposed of properly, then it could be a form of dislocated pollution, where you are just extracting waste from one dump site and putting it somewhere else. So it can contaminating the nearby ecosystem. There is absence of clear standards for remediated waste fractions. So, and also the land, what should be the appropriate application of land which is recovered is also something that we do not have standards for it. lack of data on quantification and rest of the things like borehole testing and leachate and gas generated from landfills. And there is lack of availability of sanitary landfill sites. So most of the sites that we see, most of the landfills that we see in our country are unscientifically constructed, or even if the landfills are scientifically constructed, we do not know how to operate it in a scientific manner. We don't know how to do phase-wise, utilization of the landfills. And as a result, even if a landfill is constructed with a design life of 25 years, we just take 5 years to completely use it, and then we don't know what to do with it. And if we are using it beyond its capacity, it gets converted in from a sanitary landfill site to an unscientific one. So there are three technologies that we have been using in India. First is biomining of dump site, biocapping of dump site, and hybrid model. Out of these three, the most recommended one, and this has been recommended by the MAHUA, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, also by MOEFCC, and various orders issued by the Honorable National Green Tribunal, is biomining of dump site. Why? Because here we make sure that entire waste is treated in a scientific manner, entire land is reclaimed, and entire waste fractions are disposed of or used scientifically or used for gainful applications. Whereas in biocapping, there is no treatment of the waste. We just stabilize the slope and cover it with, as per the design criteria for which is given for capping of the landfill site in solid waste management rules 2016. But it is not a long-term solution. And here also, even if we install the gas collection system, the recovery rate for methane is just, it will range. In fact, the recovery rate for all the landfill gases, including methane, is just 20 to 25%. So this is also not a sustainable solution. And many of the times, even 2-3 capping exercises have been done in India, and it has witnessed failures. So this is also not a recommended technology. The most recommended technology is biomining of the dump site, and hybrid model is basically the combination of these two, biomining as well as biocapping. So this is a simplistic pictorial representation of how biomining is done. First, the pre-feasibility assessment is done, followed by systematic excavation of the legacy waste, and then converting the entire waste into equal size windrows. After that, the stabilization and bioremediation phase is there, where some sort of microbial concentrate or cultures are sprayed over the waste, because most of the legacy waste is actually a combination of partially decomposed organic material, completely decomposed organic material, and undecomposed organic material. So it's extremely important to stabilize this material and then put it or subject it to some sort of sorting exercise where trommels are used, mobile sorting machines are used, and then segregate these legacy waste fractions into different categories, including the fine soil-like material. We also get refuse-derived fuel or segregated combustible fraction, and C&D waste and rest of the fractions. And then these are channelized to various gainful applications. In most of the cases, what we are seeing is RDF is something that is treated in cement co-processing plants, and it is used as a substitute of coal. The fine soil-like material and coarser particles, C&D particles, are used in road construction and also as a filler material for low-lying areas. When we talk about scientific treatment, because this is, as I mentioned, there are two approaches for methane mitigation. First is your dump site remediation, and second is scientific treatment. So you have to, if we are doing dump site remediation, the very first thing that we should consider is we should stop dumping of fresh municipal solid waste. Otherwise, if I'll give you Delhi's example, Delhi has to deal with 2.8 crore tons of legacy waste, which is lying in the 3 dump sites. And if they are dumping 50% of the total waste generated in the city every day in these dump sites, in just 5 years, they have to again deal with 1 crore tons of fresh waste which has been accumulated in these dump sites. So the very first thing that one should consider is develop some alternative mechanism to treat the fresh waste which is generated on day-to-day basis, and then parallelly do the dump site remediation also. So if you look at the treatment technology, we have biomethanation, composting, and bio-CNG. So if you look at this slide, this is representing the bio-CNG potential in different states. The cumulative bio-CNG potential from MSW is around 2,386.7 tons per day. However, currently we are being able to generate only 47 TPD. So there is a lot of scope in this sector. And here, this is, I think, one of the classic example is Indore, where 550 tons of organic waste, which is generated every day, is treated in a bio-CNG plant, and they are generating around 17,000 kilograms of bio-CNG. You imagine if we can also do it in metropolitan city, that will be a huge success. Now, coming to the recommendation, the first and foremost thing is to phase out the disposal of biodegradable waste in landfills. Please understand that this is not something that we are recommending. This is also mentioned in our solid waste management rules, that anything which is compostable, anything which is treatable, anything which is combustible, or anything which can be recycled should not go to the landfills or the dump site, should be recycled or treated, and only the residual solid waste which is generated from the recycling facilities and the inerts, including the street sweepings and drain cells, should ideally go to the landfill site. So out of the 100% of the total waste which is generated in the country, only 10 to 15% should ideally end up into the landfills. If organic waste is not going there, then it has to be, source segregated. So source segregation is something which is non-negotiable for ensuring that the organic waste is getting treated. And the data for quantity of MSW produced, its composition and quantity of waste disposed in landfills is highly unreliable and inconsistent in India. So if you want to estimate the, and see the improvement, first of all, we need to create a baseline information regarding how much methane is generated in waste sector. There is not much study being done in this sector. So I think it's absolutely important for us to estimate approximate quantum of waste which is generated from the landfills or in the waste sector cumulatively. And for this, it is extremely important to have data on how much waste urban India and rural India is producing, out of which how much waste is organic in nature, and then what type of models should be used to estimate that. A pan-India study needs to be conducted on estimation of methane and other GHGs from each of the legacy waste dump sites and organic waste processing facilities. In order to successfully expand organic processing pan-India, it is crucial to take into account both the demand from the end users and the capacity to utilize the products and commodities generated. So we need to do the market assessment of all the recycled products that we are generating by organic waste treatment. In fact, for in dry waste treatment also, a mandate is needed to estimate methane potential from already capped landfill or dump site. So although we have a mandate written in one of the responsibilities of urban local bodies is to, once a landfill is capped or if it is permanently reclaimed, then something needs to be done in order to understand that how much of methane is still getting emitted from that landfill site, if it is in capped form. If it is remediated, then we don't have to do the post-closure monitoring or to see how much methane is getting generated in the process. But if it is in a capped form, we need to know how much methane is emitted from those landfills. Afforestation should be promoted in the reclaimed bioremediated land. So there is a lot of debate about what should be the correct or appropriate application of the land which is reclaimed after biomining or dump site remediation process. I think the best way to go for it is afforestation, because this will also act as carbon sequester. And also, if there is any kind of toxins which are still there in the soil, it will act, the tree plantation can act as phytoremediation technique, where it will be the toxins or the heavy metals can be taken up by the plants. So that's all from my side. If you want to know more about our methane study or our legacy waste management research, you can download these reports from CSE website. So thank you so much. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Richa. And in fact, while listening to you, it just came to my mind that this is one sector, the way it's kind of illustrates the importance of domestic action and how that can contribute to global benefits. And very clearly, the moment we have very strong regulations, performance-linked funding, and good detailing of strategy backed by local knowledge system databases, you clearly see much more scaling up of action across cities. And we are beginning to see that in the waste sector. So this is not only creating opportunity for us to have livable environment, but this is also creating opportunity for the global community to cut emissions. And also it's a good learning curve. It's a good global learning curve for the global south. And that's a very good example that is we are beginning to see taking shape in India. So thanks a lot. So I think we have come to an end of the session, and I'm seeing signals that we have already overshot time, and therefore we don't have much time for more discussion. And it's flooded with comments and questions. It's really overwhelming to see this amazing response from the audience. But I know we just don't have the time to respond to each and every question and comment right now. And I'm sure my colleagues, Avantika, they will all get back to you to answer your specific questions. Some we have answered, but more we will share with you certainly. So I will not even try and summarize this very rich and very this direction-oriented conversation and the discussion that you've just had from my colleagues. It's been fascinating, so insightful. All that I will say here is that, when we had planned this webinar, and I'm sure when you saw this announcement, many of you may have thought that why at this moment when the COP28 is just a few weeks away, that and everyone is talking about what global deal are we going to get at the COP28, financing, technology transfer, all of that. Why is he suddenly saying that now this is the time also to focus on domestic strategies, right? Now, I think it must be now clear to you why. Because even when we are doing hard negotiation and we look for resources, finance, enablers, technology transfers, it is very important for the global south to know where it is going and what it needs to do. If we have not been able to figure out our own domestic strategy according to our own domestic imperatives, then what we'll end up doing is that when the finance and technology begin to arrive, they will all come as part of the top-down prescription. And they may not be the absolutely right solution because the global south does not require only technology transition, technology solution, but as you've heard from everyone, there's a rich design solution. There are a lot of institutional interventions, the financing and the design of the fiscal instruments. A lot of these things are involved, and we need a very strong clarity around what we need, and that so locally appropriate pathways in each sector needs to be the guiding factor, even for the global strategies and the global support that are expected to come our way. And therefore, we need to keep in mind that we certainly need much stronger conversation around domestic strategy today in connection with the global enablers and global accelerators in the global south, keeping in mind that the most of the growth and the development are yet to happen in our part of the world.
So there might be an internet issue. I think we've momentarily lost connectivity with Anumita ma'am. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining this presentation. From our side, we very much wanted to showcase the vast breadth of sectoral decarbonization solutions that are researched and prepared at CSE. And we hope that this adds to the global conversation leading up to COP28. As Anumita ma'am mentioned, it is quite imperative that global South countries prepare their own bottom-up, nationally determined pathways.
I got disconnected.
Anumita ma'am, I think you're back.
So,
Okay, great.
but just to
Was
continue,
just
the new
yes.
industrialization that Parth was talking about, right? If we can set the green terms of that change right away, and the cities that are still, they are growing, they are developing right now. So to have to close the loop around the waste stream that is going to get generated from the huge urban consumption, that is so critical that Richa was talking about. So all of these, therefore, help us to understand that why it is so critical for us, therefore, to focus on locally appropriate domestic strategy in the context of the global change and the agenda that Avantika had laid out right in the beginning to influence the global conversation and the way forward and the roadmap for decarbonization. So with that, let me thank you, all of you, my colleagues, Rajneesh, Avantika, Parth, Richa. That was great conversation. And thank you to the audience. And it was wonderful to have you, and you participated so actively in this conversation. And we promise that we will take this conversation forward and involve you. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.